Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Please bear with me as this is my first time hosting a space, so I'm gonna need probably a minute just to bring people up. Um, let's see. Did that work? I'm also, hello, Nicole.
Hi.
Hello, yes, okay, great.
Hello, hello.
Um, sorry, everyone. I was just saying it's my first time hosting a space, so I need a little bit of time just to bring people up and generally get familiar with how all this works. Jesse, can you speak just to make sure that mics are working?
Yo, yo.
Hello. All right. Awesome. Let me just scroll to make sure I'm not missing anybody. All right. We are going to have a total of 7 people speaking today, so it's a great number. Alrighty, and then I'm just going to find one of these tweets to display at the top of the space just so people have context. Give me 1 minute. All right. Okay, maybe noob logistical question. How does one, oh, here we go. Can people see this tweet at the top of the space?
Yeah, it looks great. I'm
Yes.
very impressed at your technical first time abilities, quite frankly.
Really? Thank
Yeah.
you. Um, okay. Sorry, who are we missing? Okay, we're missing 2 people. Dan Fowler, I see you in the audience, and I invited you to speak. I'm looking for, oh, I guess Paper Chain Dan said that he um, I think is at the airport right now, so I'm actually not sure if he'll be joining on time. Okay, 5-10 minutes late in joining. Okay, awesome. I think given the time, let's just get started. So, I am super excited. Wait, actually, hold on 1 second. I'm still trying to. Mm, uh, okay, Dan, I don't know if you can hear me, but I just sent you a speaker invite. Maybe you're not getting it. Are you listening on mobile? I think you can only join on mobile. That might be the issue. Also, Jack and Vaughn, do you want to just like very quickly speak so you can make sure mics are working?
Hey, mic check.
Awesome.
Same for me.
Amazing. Sorry everyone for the wait. Appreciate your patience. We also have a great audience listening in today. Just going through some technical things right now. Okay. In the meantime, I'm also going to put one more tweet up. Okay. Okay. I think Dan Fowler, who's one of the few other people we're waiting for, is just switching to mobile. But I think in the meantime, yeah, let's just dive in. So, yeah, thank you all so much for tuning into this space. I am super excited that there's so much interest in this topic. I guess for context about who I am and why this discussion is happening, I am the founder and publisher of Water and Music, which is a newsletter turning in real time into a research DAO focused on analyzing music and tech trends. And I just went through the Seed Club Accelerator, which Nicole, who is also speaking in today's discussion, has been super helpful with. She was my main point of contact at Seed Club, so thank you so much, Nicole. And so, yeah, in the process of, I guess, building in Web3 myself, but as a writer, I've also been covering music and crypto for the last 6 years. The first music conference I ever went to and covered as a freelance writer was also the first time that I even learned about what blockchain was. It was at Berklee College of Music back in 2015. And at Water Music right now, we're working on a really big crowdsourced collaborative research project about the current state of music and crypto. And I was doing some interviews for that project, and it just really hit me a couple weeks ago that I was having a lot of the exact same discussions that I was having back in 2015 when I was first learning about blockchain, especially when it came to things like fan onboarding, things like speculation, things like the challenges of navigating music industry politics, especially if you're trying to build things like metadata standards for music Web3 applications. And I also noticed that a lot of uh, modern, I guess the modern generation, latest wave of music Web3 builders knew nothing about companies that were, I think, super influential and at least like driving the conversation and pushing out early use cases at the time, all of which are represented among the speakers today. So including like the Open Music Initiative at Berklee, Ujo Music under Consensus, Jack, which is trying to build like a digital IP supply chain based on blockchain for the music industry. All super important projects that were just not being mentioned at all in modern music Web3 discussions. Um, and so hopefully what today's discussion will start to do is to build this kind of shared institutional memory around kind of how we got to where we are today with music and Web3 and just lessons learned from the last 5 to 6 years. And so to start the conversation, I've brought together this group of who I think are some of the best, but also importantly, most thoughtful and also critical builders and thinkers in music and Web3 today. Everyone here on stage has been involved in music blockchain projects and startups in some capacity since as early as 2015, 2016. And many, I'm sure people recognize in the audience, are working on really exciting music Web3 projects today. It's a very rare but coveted group in terms of that continuity over time. So I guess just to start off, if we could go around the virtual room and I guess give quick introductions on who each of us are, the projects that we worked on, I guess in music and Web3's first wave, so 2015 to 2018, and then the projects that we're working on now. I'm just going by, I guess, who I see at the top of the space on my end. So Jesse, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Jesse Grushak. I co-founded Ujo Music in 2015. Also was part of Our Music Festival, which someone just reminded me of as a throwback to put in there. The Decentralized Music Festival with Blau. Yeah, just been in the crypto space, I guess, for almost 10 years now, and been working on the music side of things for about 6.
Amazing. Jack, you want to go next?
Hey, yeah, Jack Spallone. I guess I got my former start in music and crypto after managing artists and getting a big distaste with music licensing and the way royalties were handled. I joined Resonate in 2016 after exploring the space for a while. Resonate, Cherie, I think you worked at Resonate for a short while. I later helped start Invoke, which was kind of a standards body, or attempt to be anyway, by Resonate and others. That led me to Consensus and Ujo Music. And then I ultimately kind of went down with that in 2020. And now I'm at Hi-Fi Labs, where we're helping artists explore how they can use technology to really empower them, but own their audience. We like to think of artists as their platforms.
Amazing. Thank you. Vaughn, want to go next?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for inviting me, Cherie. Vaughan Mackenzie Landell.
I was one of the founders of Jack. We started in 2015 with the kind of delightful idea that we could help uh, build a decentralized music network for managing music rights. We, I think, like in the cohort at that time, we spent a lot of our time focusing on working directly with music labels and publishers, and we built a fairly large pilot. It was with like Warner and Sony, and kind of rolled that through to being a micro licensing application. Unfortunately, we just ran out of money when the crypto, I guess, winter hit, and weren't able to really get those contracts signed. So we just ran into, I guess, what we'd call like apathy, general apathy in the market. And since then, just been watching the space, spending some time in crypto, and yeah, just excited seeing what people are working on at the moment. And I've been obviously speaking with lots of the other builders at the time, including the Ujo guys and also Dan, who's I guess coming up next.
Awesome, thank you. Dan Fowler, want to go next?
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay, by the way?
Mhm.
Yeah, cool. I had to put together a bit of a janky setup. I used Twitter on the desktop, and apparently you can't use space on that. Yeah, cool. So I'm Dan. I worked with Vaughan at Jack. My history was I was working at PRS for Music, which is the UK PRO, and working on strategy stuff there. And in about 2015-16, when the sort of first wave was really starting to get interesting, and sort of went down the rabbit hole, as I was. I guess the friend on the inside for people who were trying to do interesting things, and then got chatting with Vaughan and went to go and work for Jack. We did a couple working there for a couple of years, and then since then I've gone back into industry to try and sort of solve some of the issues that we had from the inside, so things like access to data and rights. And then in the past sort of 5-6 months or so, I've kind of gone back down the rabbit hole to try and help wherever I can to try and sort of help people with the sort of lessons that we've learned over that period. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing, thank you. And last but not least, Nicole, want to go?
Yeah, hey, and thanks for having me. This is such a great group. So I didn't actually realize you were at that early Rethink music event, Cherie. That's funny.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I first got introduced to music and crypto when I was working at Berklee College of Music. First supporting the Rethink Music initiative, which sort of evolved into the Open Music Initiative. And this is where I got to know all the other folks. We were working on a couple of different pieces as Berklee College, a neutral body. We thought maybe we could bring together the various industry stakeholders, so all the major labels and publishers and streaming services, plus a ton of artist organizations, and of course, the folks in the room, as well as dozens of other startups, to work on interoperability. And that's where sort of this concept or connection with crypto came in. So it wasn't necessarily that we were focused on blockchain per se, but in looking at how can we automate and streamline a lot of the payment and rights holder sharing information and make it more efficient and accurate and expedient, blockchain was a pretty clear through line. So worked there, and I think like had some advances for sure, as far as coming together and putting, I think, a couple of flags in the sand, or lines in the sand perhaps. And then most recently at Berklee, we started working on an actual product built on top of the tech. So that was called Radar, and it was focused on licensing music on chain. And we were using student music. It was all student run. We built that in partnership with MIT. And so that's what I was doing up until my time at Berklee ended about a year ago, and was kind of bebopping around. And then fortunately got to know Seed Club through Ampled, where I sit on the board. It's a music co-op platform, worker and artist owned. So I got to know Seed Club, and fortunately stuck around, and now get to support a ton of projects coming through our accelerator, like Water and Music. And you'll see that there's a lot of music projects that come through our accelerator. I clearly have a bias for music and Web3. So yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
Yes. Yeah, tons of really good music projects in the last cohort, especially. So yeah, thank you. All right, very quickly, we got Dan from Paper Chain on stage, I think. Dan, do you want to speak up just to make sure your mic is working? And then we're just doing quick intros. Hello, hello. All right. I think in the meantime, for the sake of time, hopefully Danny will be able to speak up soon. But okay, so yeah, let's dive straight into kind of the big questions. Clearly, really wide range of experience in, as I mentioned earlier, like multiple different aspects, artist facing, fan facing, industry facing around music and crypto. Today, we're going to focus on two main umbrella categories in terms of like understanding the history of music and Web3. One is kind of grouping together artist and fan facing Web3 experiences. So looking at the history of like artist social tokens, Web3 native album and single releases, and then generally thinking about the fan onboarding challenge that I'm sure a lot of people listening are kind of going through right now in Web3. And then second half of the discussion focus more on the B2B perspective about these decentralized music metadata standards are trying to bring people from the traditional music industry on board. And then I did want to flag for the sake of managing scope of this discussion and just time, because it is a huge number of topics, we're not going to invite people from the audience up to speak their questions, but we will be taking questions and I'll be monitoring everything asynchronously throughout. And so if you look at the space, I embedded a tweet. It starts with, I'm hosting a Twitter space today at 1 p.m. Eastern. I posted this morning, and that's where I'm taking questions in real time from anyone who's listening. And so if you want to reply to that tweet with any burning questions or feedback you have, you can also feel free to tag me. That's probably the most direct way, apart from this tweet, to reach me with your question. And I will do my best to kind of synthesize and aggregate everything in an audience Q&A portion towards the end. So with all that in mind, let's start with the artist and fan-facing side, and would love to hear everyone's like thoughts on these topics. But the first question I want to direct to Jesse and Jack, given that you both worked on this project Ujo Music under Consensus, and you've worked with several artists like Imogen Heap and RAC, who's still very active in music and Web3 today, on some of the earliest use cases of like fan-facing music releases on Ethereum specifically, or on blockchain in particular. I also did include a tweet at the top of the space from Jesse from a couple weeks ago that just gives a bit more context on what the nature of those projects was like. But I guess to either of you, yeah, I would love for you to walk through, how those early case studies were like structured. What was the goal of these like single/album releases on the blockchain, and what were some of the biggest challenges you ran into in that process?
Cool. Yeah. I think, you asked us what our goals with all of it was. And I think really the goal back then was just to get any users and to get people using Ethereum and to get people into the space, which it did succeed slightly at. But, Ujo was doing NFTs back in 2017. And we basically kept pivoting to anyone that wanted to work with us. It was when we released the Imogen Heat project in 2015, we had splits. We had this whole demo built out, automated splits going to all the collaborators, instant payments to Imogen. And we thought it was awesome. And we're like, great, we have a demo, we have an MVP. Now let's go out to the music industry and show them how awesome this is. And they didn't give a fuck, like, at all. Like, they were like, why would we open our black boxes? That makes us lose money. We're profitable for the first time in 15 years. this sounds like it's going to make us lose money. So no, we like the fact that we get checks every day. We don't know who they're for. We don't know where they're supposed to go, and it's not worth our time to figure it out. So we put them in a bank account, and unless someone comes and claims them, we cash them out in 2 years, and they like that. And so after spending 2016 kind of just really going deep on the whole metadata and trying to fix the existing music industry, we took a pivot in 2017, and then RAC reached out to us, and we were like, holy shit, a Grammy award-winning artist. And he was the most humble person I've ever spoken to. He was excited to speak to me, and I was like, you won the Grammy. I didn't do anything cool yet. And, he was an amazing person to work with. We released the ego token that was described in the tweet up there. And that was cool because it didn't do anything then, but because we were building on Ethereum, because we were building an open permissionless system, 3 years later, that token became used to distribute RAC token, his social token, in 2020. So kind of just showing really the power of what this technology can do. We were just kind of looking for use cases, looking for what would stick. When we did patronage badges in 2018, those were NFTs, right? They were ERC 721s, and we thought they were kind of cool, but people weren't really collecting them. And I think our biggest barrier to entry was MetaMask, honestly. It was 2017, 2018, and the world wasn't ready for wallets and keys and all of that fun stuff. And so it was super interesting. When Audius launched in 2019, I kind of was talking to their CEO, and I asked, what was their conversion rate on day one? Because you guys don't use MetaMask, you use username login. And their conversion rate was 80%. And our conversion rate was an 80% drop off when you hit MetaMask. So definite challenge there. Jack, what do you got? You got anything else that I'm missing over here?
Yeah. Jesse, you're leaving out so many important anecdotes about yes to everything you said, but I think for context here, when the Imogen Heat prototype came out in 2015, there's a couple things about that. One, MetaMask didn't even exist. The code that was written for that specific application, some of that wallet functionality went into the first version of MetaMask's code base. Just for context there. Also, the album was charged, or the song, Tiny Human, cost 1 ETH. That's how cheap ETH was at the time. Additionally, Carl Flourish built the front end of that app, if I remember correctly. And Carl Flourish, you guys might know, is one of the founders of Optimism. And he built the front end of that app. What else? In 2017, when we did the RAC album release, stablecoins did not exist. So there was all this talk then about, like, what do you do about volatility of price assets? And if you're selling things, what if someone wakes up tomorrow and they have half as much balance after selling their songs or album or whatever? Yeah, I think there's this, like right now, it's not lost on me that we take for granted how familiar all of these concepts are with everyone. But those were the real battles we faced back then. It wasn't a matter of like actual market share or finding market share as much as it was genuinely figuring out how to do this stuff for the very first time. And I think we really, really over-engineered every single thing we ever considered. In light of what's successful today, it's minuscule in compared to the kinds of things we were all architecting.
Well, that's actually interesting. Just real quick, I did forget all about that, but we were literally building some of the pieces that are still used today. And I think what frustrates me the most looking at the landscape today is, like, we built smart contracts with automated splits in 2017, and no NFT platforms have that. And it's crazy because that stuff's all open source. And like Jack said, we were building stuff from the ground up. We did the ego token before ERC 721s existed. We were using, custom built, oracles. It was a mess, and it would be like, yeah, let's do this. And then we'd be like, all right, it's going to take 3 weeks. And then 6 months later, we would finally get a product out the door because, the amount of engineering that would go into just making this stuff possible.
Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing all that. Also, just as we're talking, definitely want to highlight like not just the historical context, but like very actionable, like specific things that people who are building music Web3 applications can work on today. And like this very simple thing, this very simple feature of like automated splits seems like it should be table stakes for any application that especially wants to mesh with the ways that artists are naturally collaborating today. Just thinking about, you know, the team around artists required to get a song or album out. And yeah, this isn't. It's weird. That's not even like a Web3 problem. Like most music distributors did not have automated split features until like the last like 2 years. So even like the Web2 industry is like definitely falling behind that. But just wanted to call that out. Um, I guess Nicole. Oh, sorry. I need to bring Nicole back up as a speaker. Um, if you're hello, Nicole, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I got booted out, but I'm back.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I would love to hear, I guess, your thoughts quickly on the fan onboarding or engagement side of things. Not only because you're directly involved right now in building like communities around Web3 and around tokens, um, but also because I was reading up earlier on some early documentation around the Open Music Initiative, and there definitely was a heavy like metadata angle. But at least at like this first conference I went to, there was a lot of focus too on making sure we're always oriented towards the you know, like the fan experience and making sure that like the artist, everything kind of worked towards strengthening like the artist fan relationship and experience. So yeah, but just be curious, do you see any like parallels between some of the maybe questions or challenges that you were looking into back then and then what you're working on right now?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this because I feel like there's kind of these two branches or roads that you can take when it comes to designing with the artist in mind. And I think that one of the sort of places that we're super stuck, and I think that this is where you get into the payment splits and the metadata and kind of a lot of those like old infrastructures, is around streaming. I think that we've gotten used to having music all the time, everywhere, all the music. And I don't know if we're going to ever put that genie back in the bottle. Um, that said, I think that, sort of like lessons from the past, and I think a lot of those experiments and discussions that were happening like 2015, 16, 17 around artist experience, the concepts that we were coming up with then, I'm now starting to see come to market, um, with a lot of the small startups that we're seeing now. And a lot of they're not even really startups, they're like, experiments and ideas that people are just putting together. And so there, for example, there was one that some students worked on during a summer lab where kind of like if Song Exploder and Beat Saber and stems all collided, and you could interact with the various parts of the song in like a 3D metaversal space, and sort of get to know each of the stems, get to know some of the background behind the songs, interact with them in different ways. And those pieces, based on interaction and based on consumption, then all of that data was being captured and streaming, like payment streaming back to the artist. So I think that there was these, we felt like it was really important. And because we were working with students who have that sort of like fresh set of eyes, there was really cool ideas that were seeded throughout our work. But I think that for all of the reasons that Jack and Jesse both shared, that was not the time to make them. And so I think that, what's great, personally, what I think about what's happening right now is that a lot of those types of experiments are being made now, not sort of in relation to the old models. And I think that that's where we sort of fell off last time, because no matter what, the place where we always got stuck when we were trying to say, well, can't the artists and fans just have these experiences where the music is being consumed in these fun, delightful, new ways, in between, the fan experiencing that and the artist putting out the music was 500 different intermediaries with 500 different standards and systems and processes and country standards. And, so all of those pieces got in the way. And so I think that for a lot of artists for whom streaming is not going to ever be a major source of their income, I think it's great that that conversation has been a little sidestepped.
And so you're saying, yeah, instead of focusing so much energy on that, like trying to create new kinds of economic models entirely around music or around fandom. Is that what you're
Yeah, I think
getting
that
at? Yeah.
the places where we sort of fell off was, I think that like maybe upper middle tier of artists. So if you're a huge artist, you're going to have the potential, you're going to have the support behind you to deal with all of the various intermediary stops and, clearing all of the licensees and the rights holders that you need to do something really massively experimental. And so if you're on that, top upper tier of artists, I think it's doable. But I think that sort of a couple steps below that, it just becomes really challenging because you don't necessarily have the economic powerhouse behind you, but you still do have all of the rights complications. And so anytime that, there was the thought of like, this might be a fun experiment or that might be a fun experiment, the fact of the matter is that the rights holder information was still sort of beholden to all of these legacy institutions. And so ultimately, you could have as many delightful ideas and experiments as you wanted, but it was built on really old architecture.
That is a really good segue to next question I had in mind, which I'll start first directing towards Vaughn and Dan, but definitely I think we've all touched this like area of music rights specifically and like trying to mesh that with Web3 to varying degrees of success, because there are a lot of, I think the world of like, yeah, music metadata and music rights as it relates to Web3, that's probably the area where I have the like strongest sense of deja vu. Like we're having the like relative lack of progress from like 2015 to now about creating those kinds of standards and rights ecosystems is like just very just like really stands out to me. Hopefully that will change in the next couple of years, but I guess so, yeah. So Vaughn and Dan, question for you too. Given that you work directly on this problem with Jack, I think for people listening, it would be great to just debunk misconceptions about like what Web3 is really good at and really bad at right now when it comes to music rights. And I think just like setting realistic expectations about what the technology can or cannot do, especially when it comes to how it does or does not impact, as Nicole was saying, the kind of like entrenched landscape of players like major labels, major publishers, performing rights organizations, etc.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think as Jack and Jesse were saying earlier on, spending time trying to work with the labels is is really tough. What we did, and I think partly because of the players that were in the space, and partly because of timing, it was very clear that we used to have a phrase that we'd say, and it's quite interesting because I can see lots of Jack people in the audience. Hey, Harry and Patch, Matt. We had this phrase which was we were kind of simultaneously mega early but also mega late because there were so many other players at the time. We actually decided to kind of take the hit and not work on artist to fan. The original Jack actually was a social streaming play, but we ended up working pretty much at the back end of the industry because we felt like it was really they were the only customers in the market per se. That's where we felt there was demand and there was a problem that we thought solve. I think realistically, crypto, and it might be a bit controversial or it might not, crypto gives you absolutely zero properties that you can use to improve the back end of music, the music rights infrastructure. And I say that for a lot of reasons. Obviously, it's something we spent like five years on. There's no specific advantage, and I think it'd be quite hard to find any example of crypto helping someone fix anything legacy. Like no one's going in and taking crypto and fixing some legacy system. Typically, if they're fixing it by replacing it. Now, something that we learned the hard way by literally trying to fix it directly. And I guess that's why that's kind of where I start. And I start there because there are some kind of fundamental principles that as I look at the space as it exists now, I definitely see a lot of people kind of treading that line again, which is like crypto doesn't fundamentally change the demand curve for music. There are a bunch of people who really like what we call mainstream music, and that's why you get this like curve where there's like 1% of the artists who take most of the returns. Crypto doesn't change that. So I think though it has, there are lots of things you can do. You can't just suddenly have like these. You don't suddenly undermine the major label model. It's a great model. I think if I came away from Jack with anything, it was a respect for that model. Really hard to disrupt it. It's strong and it works just by capitalizing on the fact that like if you can invest in the top 10% of artists, you're probably going to capture most of those returns. So I think that if you're going in for disruption, like don't look at music rights, don't look at the back end of music. I think it works well enough to make that model work. I think new startups have to focus on where the new opportunities are. And I think Nicole was correct. Like, what are the new economic relationships you can build with Web3? And that's what Web3 is great at. Entirely new economic relationships you can create, build, and propagate that are built entirely on software. And I think with that, like lots of the other companies in the space at the time, as Jack, Ujo as well, were on the right path. Even I think you guys had, or Consensus had something called Tokit, which was like artist tokens. We bought a bunch of them for a crypto Christmas at Jack and like sent them all around. I've still got some Pearl, I think, which Matt sent me. But it was just too early. Again, there just weren't enough people on either side of that, of the market for that to work. Sorry, Jesse, you just came off. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, yeah, that was a project of Singular DTV, which was they raised 1 million ETH back in 2017 and no longer exists today.
Yeah. And went through
Dang.
a bunch of pivots as well. I saw they like Breaker and all those other things. It was interesting. It was a good time. But yeah, I think so when we went into like, let's go solve this like music industry metadata problem, the first thing we ran into, so my CTO used to say all the time, so Vaughan, this is not a software problem, this is a people problem. We can't solve this with software. And I said, yeah, that's why crypto potentially has an opportunity here, because what we have is effectively incentive design. We can use software to design incentives, and we can kind of realign the incentives you have in the music industry. The reason why we have a rights management problem, again, my opinion, we have a problem in music with metadata is largely just like no one cares. Like if it, for me as an individual party in the music industry, like a label or a publisher, it's not my problem that the data is wrong. It's someone else's problem, and it might impact me like 1-2%. Like it's not really going to impact me that much. Overall, the industry, the drag on the industry might be like 20%. It might be much greater. But ultimately, that's a coordination failure. So if you think about what blockchains are great at, it's like providing points of coordination, and that is really what we wanted to do. But it was impossible. We got in there. There's like a lack of legal infrastructure. No one knows what's going on. As the Ujo guys were saying, there wasn't very much wallet infrastructure. The labels can't accept tokens. Artists can't accept tokens. Industry readiness is low. Our internal capabilities were low as well. Like we couldn't do all this stuff. No one knew how to do it. It wasn't something we could take off the shelf and do. We had to design everything from scratch. And if they say in startups you get like 2 or 3, maybe you get like 1 or 2 innovation tokens or credits to cash before you die. We were cashing them every day. We had like 1,000, and none of them worked out. So I guess that's why I don't think that was successful at that time. And I do think that it won't be successful in the future. I think it's the wrong place to start. It's like Amazon didn't start disrupting bookshops by building bookshops. They started by building, an online store, and then now they're building bookshops, right? So it's kind of like, I think I tend to find that when you kind of come into crypto, people all of a sudden kind of throw lots of the fundamentals about what works when you're trying to disrupt or innovate, and just throw everything at the wall. I think it's tough. And another kind of rule of thumb that we took from Jack was the music industry doesn't have a bank account, it doesn't have a checkbook, it doesn't have an email address. You can't sell to it. So you need to still find like one group of people who are just going to spend money, spend time, do anything valuable. If you can't find that value exchange up front, which obviously in the first wave none of us were able to do, I just think you're going to really struggle. And unless you can just raise infinite cash, you're going to run out of money. But I'll stop and I'll hand over to Dan because he's got a lot more to say.
I mean, I'm not going to try and explain the Jack stuff because you'll always do that better than me, Vaughn. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you've just said. I think one of the challenges that the issues that we were trying to solve are infrastructure problems. And for that, there's no single customer, as you said. So you're trying to sort of network together as many of the big customers as possible, and so that's why we went down the route of trying to talk to the biggest entities. But the problems there aren't specifically crypto problems. They're problems that every single music tech startup has. If you feel like your best route is to go and do deals with the major labels, then you're setting yourself up to go through probably 2 years worth of negotiations and deals, and ultimately at the end of it, you'll get put on one of their innovation deals, which massively limits the scope of what you can do, and you end up doing something that's probably very different to what you were hoping to do at the beginning. So I guess that's kind of why I've got to the point now where whenever anyone ever asks me what their approach should be to try and do something interesting in the music industry, is don't do it through the major channels, because it's just not going to work. I think why I feel like crypto music's interesting now, though, is kind of leaning on the point the other guys made, is that sort of like the underlying infrastructure from a crypto perspective is so much more advanced than it was now. And there's another point as well, which is that we have proof points that we didn't have before. Last time around, everyone was raising an ICO, but no one really knew if that was going to work or not. You kind of like, you had about 6 months worth of data. You saw that X raised loads of money, Y raised loads of money, but you had no idea whether the way they did it was the right way to do it or not. And as we've kind of seen, most of the big ICOs that were raised then have kind of resulted in nothing. Whereas now we can kind of see what models were working, and start to build around that. I think probably the same thing's going to happen with what's happened this year. Some people have kind of gone off in certain directions and done quite well, but we need a bit more data to see whether that is really the right way to do it or not. But this is how a new industry builds, right? It builds in waves, and you're essentially getting feedback from people doing experiments, and then building on from that. And so that's why I guess things like this are quite important, where people who've done this stuff before can kind of say what worked for them and what didn't. And that's why I feel quite bullish about this space in a long-term view, because there's a sort of ethos within here that everybody kind of wants to help each other. Like, there's an overall goal here, which is to genuinely change the music industry, and this is only a strength to that. I think my final point I'll say as well is that one of the big differences then and now is that, as the Ujo guys said, there weren't really that many artists who were that interested at that point. There's people who were probably either from an industry perspective or from a crypto perspective who were looking at this problem and potential solution space and thinking, oh yeah, there's something quite interesting here. But there weren't that many artists who were really interested in it. Whereas now there's actually quite a few success stories that are starting to build up, and that's a slightly different paradigm. But there's still a lot of work to do, and I think that's why the most exciting projects for me at the moment are the ones who are trying to bring more creators into this, and to do experiments with them. And yeah, I guess we'll see where we are in about a year's time. But I think sort of like the timeline on this thing is, you don't build a new industry overnight. It's going to be a sort of 3, 5, 8 year thing.
Thank you both so much. There is so much to unpack there. Very quickly, I'll just go over some points that stood out to me. One, definitely a huge takeaway. So interesting. So for me personally, and like what I'm trying to do with water music, huge takeaway, and like someone on my team, the way that he puts it is that a lot of the issues are not how to crypto, it's how to people, and crypto is just the implementation layer. Really fundamentally, like whether it's creating a token, building a DAO, so much of it fundamentally is how to like coordinate and motivate and inspire and empower people. And you can, kind of extrapolate that, as Vaughn, you were saying, to the music industry, where like the metadata standard issue for it to really work in the mainstream music industry, like at mainstream scale, requires a whole level of coordination that that is just seemingly impossible to pull off. Also, definitely, reiterating that blockchain, at least the way I understand it, is a garbage in, garbage out kind of system. If you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. The tech won't fix the issue. And there's a ton of garbage when it comes to like music rights data in the music industry right now. Even if you think about like companies like Hypnosis that are like buying up music catalogs left and right, that already is creating an accounting nightmare for labels and publishers before we even like think about Web3 and tokens. So just wanted to like bring that up for context as an example of something that like blockchain alone is not going to solve. I guess quick before asking a more like general question, this is more a question for the group, building on another like huge theme of, especially when it comes to the streaming and right side of the equation, trying to create entirely new economic models first and foremost. So I have noticed there have been a lot of like one-off use cases of artists essentially auctioning off a portion of their traditional streaming revenues through NFTs. So we don't have to like dive into or like break down specific case studies, but I'll just mention a few as an example. I know Verite, the artist, very early on sold a one-of-one NFT that gave the winner a portion of streaming revenue. Lyra, another independent artist, did that for one of her recent singles. Blau, probably one of the biggest examples with his Royal platform, giving like over 300 people a share of streaming revenue in his latest single. It's interesting to see all these like case studies coming up on a very, very micro level. Like people are experimenting with splitting royalties on the level of just like one single. And it's like definitely not an industry-wide solution. I guess I'd be curious to hear people's thoughts on like that approach specifically, because that is where I see things going. Still on the fence about like how well that model will actually work in the long run, of like starting with these kind of micro case studies, still built around, I guess, traditional revenue streams at the end of the day, with like splitting streaming royalties, and then kind of having Web3 essentially be an additional investment layer on top of the traditional industry. I don't know if people have any thoughts on that.
Can I jump in on that one? Is that okay?
Yes. Also, just wanted to highlight, I know, Dan, so I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, and because of that, I highlighted a tweet at the top of the space around an article that Dan wrote for Modern Music. I guess this is partially self-promotional, but really, really good piece about, it's called like the case for like a post-royalties music industry, where it kind of like creates the case for exploring entirely new economic models beyond just the royalty payment system we have today, including but not limited to Web3. So just wanted to mention that, but then Dan, want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think so. I spent the last 2 years working for the European hub for licensing and paying out royalties for digital exploitation, and I guess I've kind of got more and more depressed about the entire royalty model, which felt like a ridiculously controversial thing when I first thought about it. But the more I've thought about it, the more I think actually royalties as a model for paying creators, especially creators who are coming up through now, is making less and less sense. And so I won't describe that article now. If anyone wants to read it, they can read it. But that's kind of my default position. And so if we're looking to build a new way of doing things, then it doesn't make any sense to me that we would be looking to build a new model that's basically just putting a shield around the old model. And sort of on that point as well, the idea of democratizing financing of creators through giving them royalty splits also isn't something new. I mean, that's something that's been done for years, like things like Bowie bonds and stuff. And it hasn't really succeeded at all. So why would crypto make any difference? Now, there have been some successes in projects doing this over the past month or so, but you have to ask yourself, is that because of the sort of business model that is being sold through this NFT, or is it because it's an NFT? And I think it's a fair question to ask whether, in the Royal example, for example, whether if there weren't any royalties attached to that, whether the actual NFT would be worth more.
Meaning, because right, if it would be worth more because it's not tied to a traditional
Yeah,
system,
I
you'd
mean,
say. Yeah.
The industry spent a long time saying how bad the payout from streaming through royalties is. So it doesn't really make much sense from a sort of return of investment perspective to allow people to participate in that if that's not very good. I mean, I think the most interesting thing for me is, as has been mentioned a couple of times before, around building new business models, and thinking about a way that artists can get paid that isn't through the traditional rails that we've kind of become used to.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that. So another way that I like to think about kind of that model that Dan's put forward is the old adage, like, if you make something easier to do, people do more of it. And at the moment, we effectively have this like I think the introducing royalties and effectively like the copyright model back into Web3 is like I call it like crypto LARPing. It's like you're kind of like redoing what's already there. And also you run back into the attribution problem. So if you suddenly have to do splits everywhere, you still have to then do attribution. You inherit the same problem. I'm not saying that you don't want to have splits, but you effectively have this greenfield solution to build, as we said, like new models. And you have this really nice property with NFTs. You have this like native digital right. It's effectively a right that's in software, and it's enforced not by like the government. It doesn't take the cost of the courts or any of that stuff. It's just in math. It's just in software. Like for the same cost of like producing every single like block, you still get to enforce all the rights that have been encoded in every smart contract that's on chain. So this is great. This is like super low cost enforcement of rights. And obviously you're limiting the types of rights you can express. You can't force someone not to copy something. But as we've seen, it doesn't seem to matter that much, right? With NFTs, it's like, yeah, I can copy your picture, but it doesn't matter. I'm still the only owner of that NFT. Now, if you remove the royalty, you suddenly look at it, instead of saying like, oh, well, the reason why I want to own that royalty is because I'm going to get this perpetual royalty stream. Well, imagine you just said, well, the reason why I want to own this NFT is because it represents the full value of the asset, right? That's it. It just represents everything. And then now the actual like difficulty of having to do the attribution globally for every single asset and then also flow the money back to the holder of that NFT starts to look like a cost. And so now you're thinking that the price of that asset, the NFT, is actually just being reduced by the overall friction of having to then, do attribution, flow the money back to the original person. And I think it's just interesting to think about flipping that model and say, well, what if it was like mega simple? Like owning the NFT is entirely the value proposition of that NFT for everything. And the music itself is like free to use wherever you want. It might just mean that it's so simple that all of a sudden you get this free flowing, lovely open music industry and all the value just represented in that single NFT. Like you can kind of see why it might actually end up being a much, much more valuable market. That's just way easier.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, really, really well said. And that's a good segue into one of the, I guess, last higher level questions I want to ask the group before diving and sifting through some audience questions. For people who tuned in a bit later, there is a specific tweet that I've included at the top of the Twitter space. Starts with, I'm hosting a Twitter space today at 1 p.m. Eastern, and that's where I am collecting some audience questions. For the sake of scope, we're not going to bring up audience members onto stage, but we are just taking questions asynchronously. So if you have any burning questions, thoughts about anything that we talked about, please reply to that tweet. You can also just at me directly, and I will do my best to synthesize everything. So just want to mention that. And then, so then thinking about this idea of yeah, I guess like into new use cases that are emerging, not being bogged down by the kind of entrenched industry politics of the traditional music business, or entrenched kind of like royalty payment flows. Um, would love to dive into what some of those like genuinely new markets or use cases look like, and in terms of what's most exciting to this group. Nicole, I know you haven't spoken for a while and have to jump off soon-ish, so I would love to um, direct this question to you first. So, what are the in terms of thinking about genuinely new use cases around and I guess it doesn't just have to be NFTs, can be social tokens, DAOs, but thinking with, I guess, the artist at the center, also a huge theme of this discussion. Are there any specific like case studies or use cases that stand out to you?
Yeah, I think I really appreciate what was just said around, that like actually an NFT not connected to royalties may end up being more coveted. I think that what could end up making that even more important is discoverability, because I think that that's one of the pieces where we've sort of dropped off a little bit with NFTs. So the best current example, although I think it is worth mentioning that the payments I think haven't really totally been figured out within it because it's so nascent. But BPM Bot, which was built on top of Catalog, it was built, I don't know, basically overnight by Matthew Chaim and Songcamp crew, and I'm sure many others behind the scenes. So it was in reaction to the fact that Rhythm and Groovy and a bunch of the music bots that we've all become accustomed to in Discord had basically stopped working overnight thanks to YouTube. And so all of a sudden we had no music in our Discord servers. And so Matthew Chaim had the idea to build his own and build it on top of Catalog. And I think that that was just brilliant because I, for example, have been now enjoying much more music from Catalog, like getting to know more songs and more artists because of the events that I go to in Discord and the, little bit of music before, after. At the end of our accelerator, we had somebody DJ at the beginning and at the end. And we had like 100 people stick around at the end of the accelerator just listening to the music because it was so good. And so I think that the more that there's discoverability put on top of those NFTs, I think that that is going to make those assets much more valuable. And then I think that, as far as social tokens go, the piece where I'm looking to see happen, I don't know of a ton of examples, although I'm sure other people are more knowledgeable about this. But I think that similar to kind of old fan zines and fan clubs, there was this like signaling of what music that you were into that was so important and so defined your personality and your ethos. And I think that I could see those being the successful, music social tokens or artist social tokens, when there is a signaling of the culture that it also stands for. So, yes, I'm into Latasha, or I'm into BTS, or I'm into Taylor Swift, but that also stands for these other pieces. And I think that this is what I was saying in a conversation we were sort of back channeling about, is ultimately with the tokens, you need the many to many connections for those communities to be valuable. And so I think that in all of the cases, I think there's like the day-to-day music consumption, that's one thing. But then when there's something built on top of that, whether that's a community and relationships or whether that's additional experiences, that's going to make the music ultimately more valuable.
Those are so good. Thank you so much, Nicole. Just to highlight, and then Jack, I do want to direct this question to you next, especially because you have this tweet that I also highlighted at the top of the space that is so good. That is all the way back from March 2021, which is crazy. But just for highlighting for people, Jack compiled this really good list earlier this year of like a bunch of different use cases around music and Web3, far beyond just NFTs. Before diving into that, another note, also thinking about like very concrete, things that maybe music Web3 builders listening in can start to think more about and concretely build. I and Alex, who I think is listening, yeah, on the Water Music team, we were like testing out a bunch of different Web3 music bots that are coming out. So yeah, there's a BPM bot, which is built on Catalog, and then the top shelf sewn bot, which I think is still being tested. But yeah, we realized like discoverability is a huge issue because the only way you can functionally use the BPM bot is if you already know what you are looking for. I guess it's like still a pretty early stage, in pretty early stage of development, but the only way you can use the bot is by like going to catalog, getting the specific URL for the specific song that you want to play, and then putting it in your queue. Um, what would be super interesting and yeah, debatable whether this is like the best experience, but having yeah, I guess having some more kind of serendipitous discovery built into these kinds of bots. And this actually has a direct line to metadata. So like, is there a way to, tag certain songs on these platforms such that you can kind of just type a command and have, I guess, the catalog on a given music NFT platform just like play on shuffle depending on some criteria, like certain genres, certain moods, certain sounds. That would be super interesting. I think would get rid of a lot of the barrier to engagement, at least with those bots. So just wanted to bring that up as like very tangible thing that kind of came to my mind last week. But Jack, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Cherie. So I just wanted to highlight, because this is kind of the conversation so far and level set it. The first wave of music crypto startups was largely predicated on this rights issue. I mean, that's where Jack went and focused on. That was actually a large part of Ujo's focus. Because if everyone probably knows this, or at least has gotten wind that music rights information is an absolute tragedy. There's no like single source of verified information that is updatable by verifiable people. So when you think of a large publicly owned ledger, it kind of very intuitively lends itself to a potential solution for that rights registry issue. If you combine tokenized incentives on top of that for like a dispute resolution mechanism, that ultimately becomes this like very powerful idea. And really this vision of Web3 that I think every company in this first wave shared was this interoperable licensing network for music catalogs. Is probably a little naive to assume that you could register all of the global catalog of music and make it programmatically licensable. But when I speak about that first wave and the solutions we were trying to look for metadata and how we match that, and loosely that's kind of a conversation around music standards, we really tried to work with the incumbent industry to modernize their systems. What we're doing today with music NFTs is a very, very distinctly different thing in that it finally exists separately. So when I think about the importance of music NFT metadata standards today, I don't think about them in the context of being compatible with DDEX or carrying certain properties of information like ISRC and ISWCs, although those are important. I instead think that it would be really awesome if there was more data hygiene around the information that we stored around these NFTs to describe specifically what they represent, both from a maybe rights holders perspective, accommodating splits, but also simple things like title, writer, author, all the different fields that would go with a composition and recording, so that if I put a song on catalog, you can then take that song and put it into another application, but you could also pull in the necessary metadata context, and you could have a standard way of ingesting that information. So I think the onus right now on music startups is to collaborate together to decide what are the standard things that we're selling. There's one of ones, there's additions, there's more unique contextual experiences sold as tokens. How can we use Web3 decentralized systems to reduce redundancy at the identity level, at the asset level, and at the action or behavior level? So there's a lot there, and I do go into this a little bit in that tweet, in those ideas. But I don't, and we talked about this as a group earlier. I don't see a lot of I don't see the majority of music NFT startups actually focusing on that bigger unlock. They're rather focused on more one dimensional use cases that leverage crypto, but do not really lean into this interoperable open web as much as I think we all talk about it.
I think it's tricky though, isn't it? Just if I could just very quickly reply to that, I think I completely agree. I think in the first wave, as we've been calling on this, we shot for the stars on building a sort of global interoperable network, and everyone's building different layers, and it all fit together into this beautiful design, which is way too ambitious for where the technology was and where we were. In this wave, I think there's a lot more focused experimentation, but I feel like personally that there's a bit of a challenge that's happened, typically as the price of Bitcoin goes up, price of crypto goes up, projects start to imitate each other a lot more. You get into the imitation cycle, and that really limits the amount of experimentation that happens, which is a challenge because I really like how projects have been very focused on what they're trying to do this time around, but there's been a bit of a limit in how far that's been pushed, and so it feels like there needs to be somewhere between where people are willing to try slightly riskier things to see if it works, and then that information can flow back through the space.
Yeah, thank you both, Jack and Dan. I know, Nicole, you have to jump now very soon, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna go into my next meeting, but I think that going back to what we were talking about around like discoverability, one piece that I think is sort of, all things old or new again is the importance of human curation and DJs. And I feel like that ends up being a really important metadata solver as well, because ultimately, I'm a big listener to my local folk station, and the knowledge that those DJs have of who produced what and which label it was, distributed on, and all of these like key pieces that sort of give you that family tree of where an artist came from or why an album sounds the way it does is carried mostly in them as humans, as music lovers. And so I think it's a fun time to be a music lover. I mean, I rely on folks like Boss in the audience and Mark and Samsonite to DJ and find great songs within catalog, which I know is like not a scalable solution necessarily. But I think it then also goes back into the metadata, because then you're building kind of like the minimum viable set of metadata that's important to those people that are helping with discoverability. So in the metadata work that Garrett Hughes is doing for Web3, I think it was Rayhan who would put like slaps, like a binary, like yes, no, does the song slap? And I loved that. So
that's great.
Yeah, it was awesome. So I think that I love the idea even of metadata sort of being led by humans. And that certainly, in the past world, we were trying to literally collect all of the metadata ever about the song. And, like everybody said, it was a complete fool's errand. But I'm sorry I have to jump. I would love to talk to y'all about this all day long. But this was so awesome. So thank you for holding the space as well. And thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. Yep, have a good day. And I think the rest of us speaking now can stay for at least a little bit longer. And I definitely do want to go through some audience questions. So before doing that, though, Jesse, you've not spoken for a while, and so would love to hear any additional thoughts you might have on this question of like new use cases that are exciting to you.
Yeah, I think, overall, nothing's like been mind-blowingly exciting at the moment. It's exciting to see. What's exciting to me is really seeing artists weave the story of Web3 together, using the tools that kind of exist right now, and not necessarily choosing one, but like Halik, Latasha, the artists that are really like, they're on Mirror doing a crowdfund for a token for an album. They're doing NFTs on Catalog, and they're really just like, they're pushing the boundaries on what it means to be an artist that's being supported by the space, the crypto space. And I think to me that's really exciting because I'm kind of like not really interested in all of these platforms looking at artists as ways to get users. I'm more interested and excited about artists using these platforms to get their users and to get their fans together and weaving the continuous story of Web3 together through their own fan base or their own token or Discord or, the tools still aren't there yet. But this is kind of a lot of what we're trying to do at Six as well, is really help artists and help guide them on that journey and support them and, take some of the calls that they consistently get bombarded on. And they're like, well, should I take this token grant from this person or should I take these advisory tokens? They're going to give me this much. And, that's to me is not exciting. But what's exciting is the artists that are really taking advantage of it. So, looking forward to seeing more artists really dive into this space and seeing more tools come out that work composable together. And yeah, it's kind of what I'm excited about.
Yeah, it goes back to what I think Jack said earlier on about this notion of the artist as the platform and not the platform itself as a platform, and the former idea really being the biggest potential of why we're using Web3 in the first place. Yeah, these ideas of decentralization, composability, as you said, Jesse.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so that actually is, I think, good transition to audience Q&A. I know that we're going a little bit over, so definitely want to respect everyone's time, but there are a couple of questions related to, I guess, okay, it's a follow-up on a lot of what you all talked about kind of historically, so 2015 to 2017, 2018. Technically there was just so much that was still being built, like MetaMask, its current form not even really existing at the time. And so a lot of the barriers to understanding and to adoption were genuinely as technical as they may have been political or social. Today, the tech is in a very different place, but if you look at certain NFT drops, so I remember usually if if a major pop artist tweets about a new NFT drop, chances are their fan base is going to bombard the tweet with a lot of critiques being like, no, why are you doing this? This is bad for the environment. Even a mention of the word NFT can create such a negative reaction with a lot of fan bases. Obviously it differs from artist to artist, but we're doing a big kind of research project into this at Water Music right now around fan sentiment, and that's just something that I've noticed seems to be the biggest barrier. It's less a tech problem and more a narrative storytelling and marketing problem. I don't know if that's consistent with, I guess, what you all have seen. And if so, what guidance might you have for people who are launching new Web3 tooling for artists, or artists who want to release a new NFT collection or launch a new token? Any advice you might have on the narrative side of things?
I'll take that, I guess.
Sure.
I think it's the narrative really is everything. There's so many projects right now that have done really well because they have a strong, I'll call it quote unquote, community behind it, even if it's really just a bot army or whoever talking about it on Twitter. And I think it's the more honest, the more real you are with this. If you look at someone like Halik, right? And I keep bringing him up just because I've been paying a lot of attention to what he's been doing. And I'm sure there are a lot of other really great examples. I just am blanking totally. But he's on Twitter all the time. He's jumping into everything, and he's just putting his heart out there and telling people what's real. And he's not giving up. He's doing crowdfundings that are lasting 30 days or more. with some of these projects. And that's the thing is like, I think this stuff is like, if you don't see immediate success, keep pushing on it and keep trying, because really all it takes is a few people to start getting interested in your project before you start to kind of create that momentum to really get other people interested and talking about it and tweeting about it. And so, I would just say like honesty is really the number one thing here. But, jump into these Twitter spaces, reach out to, people on Twitter, DM them your projects. It's like, you can't, there's not too much. There's never doing too much, I don't think, with the space right now, because there's so much noise and so much stuff going on that it's really hard to kind of pay attention. But if you have good intentions and you have a good project and you want to help push the narrative of the crypto space and the music space and all that, you'll definitely find supporters.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse. Anyone else in the group want to add anything?
Yeah, just
go on, you go, Jack.
No, I was gonna say big +1 to what Jesse mentioned about the narrative and story. And I think that also ties really nicely into his prior point about how you have artists using different tools. And I mention this to people all the time, but like the real vision of Web3 is now currently being realized despite the shortcomings of this technology, even still in its nascency, with people doing things on Mirror like crowdfunds or NFT editions, also doing things on Catalog, maybe returning some of those catalog sales back to their Mirror crowdfund supporters, joining Songcamp, joining FWB, having all these different reputational indicators in the form of social token holdings, or community token holdings. The stuff that you're doing with Water and Music, Cherie, like this to me is the real beginning of Web3. You're using your identity via your wallet. I mean, sometimes we're using different wallets for these things, but for the most part, it's like your one main public wallet with your ENS. You have this little token trail of the things that you're doing. Like, I'm so excited to see someone build an application that pulls in the artists that are doing Mirror crowdfunds, pulls in the supporters of them, shows the catalog NFTs those artists are releasing, shows the people who are buying them. And it's kind of like a two-way platform for artists and fans to go and like exist on a UI that really is a dashboard for viewing all of this activity. Like that's the big unlock. Like I still to this day take calls every week where someone tells me that they want to do catalog but do it better, and I'm like, huh? Like you're really missing the point of what catalog does. Like if you want to go curate catalog and offer some discovery features, because that's typically what people are talking about, sorting features, you can do that. You can go build on top of them without their permission. And catalog, understanding Web3 and what it stands for and designing for it, would be really receptive to that idea. And it really just validates this model. So I think right now, my framing would be we're seeing this kind of like first order of Web3 apps kind of existing. But I really can't wait for the second order that comes and builds on the context that we're creating right now. And it's the storyline that we're talking about. It's that narrative. And that is so cool and exciting. And that's something that we were like so below the fold on years ago. And we really, I don't think I would have dreamed of this kind of happening in the way that it did, where you have all this activity and all these artists really coming in and really driving this.
So well said. Yeah, thank you, Jack. Dan, did you want to add anything?
No, what I was going to say wasn't really important. It was about the sort of negative narrative side. I think I'm more interested in just adding on to what Jack was saying there. I think sort of like as you say, like the tools are being built now for artists to create their narrative within this new industry, and the success of this new industry is entirely dependent on both sides of that network growing, i.e., people selling their music, selling the creators within that network, and people who want to buy on the other side. I think one stat that's really stuck with me over the past few weeks, though, is something that Water Music put together, which is about just how many artists have actually sold the music NFT so far. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's about 250. Cherie?
I think yes. So the for context for people who are listening, we have a very extensive dashboard at Water Music of music NFT sales that we've been tracking for over a year now. So since like last summer. By nature of the just the sprawling, yeah, music web the ecosystem, definitely aware it's like probably incomplete. Definitely focused on we try to cover as many like independent artist releases as possible on platforms like Catalog, but also tracking more publicly announced drops on platforms like Nifty Gateway, which is very different, but definitely like pretty prominent in terms of who they work with. So yeah, not complete. I would say the more realistic number is like somewhere between like 300 to 500 artists who have successfully who have sold or minted a revenue generating NFT, so generated a sale. So that's like the range that I would put. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point I was going to make on that is that it's a incredibly low number to what anybody
Yeah.
who's kind of been observing this space from the outside would expect, which is very interesting, and also kind of to me really highlights the thing that is going to grow this thing. It's the platforms who are managing to onboard more creators into it and onboard more fans into it, onboard more people who want to buy things and financially support this new industry that's growing. So yeah, they're the platforms, or they're the people who are working in that way are the ones that are really exciting me.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. I really wish, yeah, it's unfortunate we weren't able to get Dan from Paper Chain on stage because I did want to ask, and I guess this is a question maybe for the group about like artist onboarding. Because I guess what Paper Chain is working on, they're building, I guess in their case, they are building a kind of decentralized slash Web3 layer on top of collecting Web2 income streams like streaming royalties. So would have been interesting to get Dan his thoughts on that. But any I guess yeah, there's a fan onboarding issue, but then there's like the artist onboarding issue, Dan, that you just highlighted. Anyone in this group, any um, advice or guidance there of like building tools that will be genuinely useful for artists and like helping to bring them into Web3. Any thoughts there?
So I think it's probably worth pointing out what Paper Chain does, because it's an incredibly fascinating concept and solves for a long-standing issue with how do you bring off-chain royalties on-chain. So royalties are paid out from DSPs at a pretty slow cadence. Spotify actually pays out faster than most all DSPs, as far as I'm aware, and it still takes about 75 days to receive royalties from the day that they happen. Royalties, though, as we all know, are pretty much based on a range of rates that can be pretty predicted with some historical understanding of what they've been in the past, both on the mechanical side, but also on the master side and performing rights. So what PaperChain does is, because you can access data from DSPs on streaming usage in real time, is as granular as the hour, but even within the day, PaperChain can take any time frame of data set of usage of a given artist's work or on Spotify, for example, and then they will give you an advance in the form of stable coins in real time, and then collect the royalties in the 75 days or whenever they come out on your behalf, and then settle the difference. There is like a small interest rate associated with that, but it's a very, very novel use case that is not like hardcore decentralization purist. It's not very consumer layer, but it solves a real problem using DeFi. And this has been around conceptually for them, I think, since 2018 or maybe 19. But it really, really solved a problem with how do you bridge these two worlds? So you can extrapolate outward and think if they're integrated into all DSPs in the future, and all artists can have some sort of paper chain or paper chain like protocol like way of bridging their revenue on chain, then that's just an additional revenue stream that could sit in this kind of flywheel of a bunch of other Web3 related revenue. And then when you have this, full economic picture executed on chain and the stuff that happens off chain brought on chain, it really lends itself to the way money is moved around artists and their products. I'm not saying royalties specifically here. All being on chain, it would open up a lot more opportunities with how financial tools can help artists.
Yeah, thank you for that walkthrough, Jack. This is related to, I think this might be, for the sake of time, the last question that I take from the audience. So there are some replies to this tweet around kind of related to the issue of like web music and Web3 in terms of licensing. And Vaughn, I would want to direct this question to you, given how I guess like strongly you feel also like based on your experience, as you articulated earlier, about how the crypto is just not a system for, I guess, like improving the copyright slash rights picture for say in the industry. There's some questions about, I think the best way to frame it is like licensing models for like syncs around music NFTs. So for people who are listening who might not be aware, if you want to, place your music in a film or TV show or video game, you have to, or you would, as an artist, you would issue a synchronization or sync license for that. And so people, given that so many NFTs are like audiovisual in nature, naturally the question has come up a lot. And I've seen a lot of like, again, very one-off kind of fragmented examples of people trying to execute a sync license for a song on chain. My gut reaction to that, like based on especially everything that we've talked about, is that, or I wonder, is that even like is that the wrong like question or framework to be thinking about in the first place in terms of, trying to put this very traditional, important, but traditional, source of licensing revenue on chain. Should we be thinking about entirely new licensing models? Or so I don't know if you have any thoughts about that specifically, because I've heard sync come up a lot in the last couple of weeks as like a place that people are experimenting with.
This is a weird one, because I guess I think on the one hand, yes, there's that kind of like skeuomorphism of taking a model that works in the traditional world, and also the idea that you have an asset, you own the asset, someone else wants to use that asset, so you can issue them a license to use it. It's fairly simple, right? It's like just how you would get usage of anything, right? I think that, I guess it comes down to what I see as kind of fundamental properties of the web. One of the things that made Napster so successful is it was almost a model that was native, that was web native. It was, well, if the cost of sharing a file is zero, I can literally, every time I send a file from one place to another place, I make a copy of it. Then why would you monetize the file? Why would you say like why would you try and imbue that file with copyright, which is like a separate system, like a legal system? The file can be shared infinitely. And I guess like you have to ask yourself, you can do a sync basically for free, right? You can take the song, add it to another thing, and then you can just push it online. The file is there. Anybody can see the file, and anyone can listen to it. There's no real cost to do that. So it seems strange to then, like, it's also quite difficult to enforce digitally that license. Like, can you really gate the sync? Can you stop people using an asset if they have the asset, if they have the file? And so I guess, like, on the one hand, yes, it's really great to have an asset that can make you money. And yes, I don't think licensing revenues will go away. I think you can do synchronizations. I think you're probably still going to run into the cost of enforcement. Like, I can literally go sync anything to anything right now on my laptop at zero cost. No one can really stop me. Actually read this story the other day about someone who had given a royalty-free piece of music, produced something, and then contributed it to a project, and then that person decided that they wanted to go and put it into an NFT. All of a sudden, they ran into kind of I guess a licensing issue where he technically didn't have a license to issue that song. I think to issue that NFT. And I think it's the same if you go to most NFT marketplaces. I think the one I read was Maker's Place, like their terms of use. There's some very specific licenses you're entering into when you use that platform to mint an NFT. And if you add two different types of assets, you're granting like a commercial license either to the platform or to someone else. So I think it's impossible to get around. But I think designing for it as like a key model of like a Web3 market doesn't seem to make sense to me. It seems again like you're just trying to map an old model in. I think it'd be far more interesting to think about what economic relationship you'd want to build between you and a business or a commercial user. That wasn't just them, maybe another way of thinking about it is what would you have to do if you had to give your music to Spotify for free? How would they pay you? What would the economic relationship be, given that they can just get the file from anywhere? So yeah, it's not very satisfying kind of conclusion, but I think that's kind of where my head is. It doesn't seem obvious to me that there should be something such as sync licensing. It even works awfully in the traditional copyright world. So I feel like there's probably a much simpler model that we could get to in crypto.
No, yeah, I think that is definitely part of the story or takeaway is that it is still inconclusive, or that it's might just be like an apples to oranges kind of comparison. Any last thoughts on that from anyone else in the group?
I recently helped negotiate a sync license for an NFT release, and anyone who's ever negotiated a sync license knows that it's incredibly expensive from a legal perspective, and it just is seemingly incongruent with what we're actually doing. I understand the enticing nature of it. These are inherently audiovisual pieces for the most part, and therefore it makes sense. It also circumvents the interactive stream or non-interactive stream, which would necessitate royalties going through PROs and CMOs. So it makes sense, but it is not a right fit.
Appreciate all your perspectives on this. I think, and also thank you all for staying for so long, especially I think to respect all of your time. I think this is a good place to wrap up the discussion. And thanks so much again to everyone who also stayed for so long or even just popped in for a little bit and listened. This is a really good audience. Just to recap some takeaways, at least that I got from this discussion. One, metadata copyright angle. Blockchain is a garbage in, garbage out kind of system, trying to map, legacy copyright data and infrastructure onto Web3 is seems to be a losing battle. And especially if you look at, lessons from 2015 and 2018 all the way up to now. I think what everyone in this group is a lot more excited about is creating entirely new economic models, kind of rethinking from the ground up economic relationships that people have with music, that artists have with fans, and especially this idea of like the artist themselves as the platform and building for interoperability and composability around that. And then also Nicole, who had to leave earlier, but she also brought up the issue of like discoverability and never forgetting or like not forgetting the like human role in music culture and curation, and always and the potential leading with that both at the metadata level and also if you're minting your own social token as an artist, thinking about not just how fans can potentially profit from whatever upside you have, but also like culturally, what does your community stand for, and design the token around that wider cultural level and not just some singular individual artist. So yeah, thank you all so much again. This conversation is recorded, and so I think if all goes well, this recording should be available if you just go to this event link for this Twitter space, at least for the next 30 days. So yeah, and feel free to reply to this tweet or to the original announcement tweet, or at me with any additional questions, and I'm sure a lot of people in this group will be more than happy to chat and answer additional follow-up questions. Yeah, thanks so much again to all of you. This is really great.
Cheers, Cherie.
Thanks, Cherie.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks all. Have a great day.